So what's the story? Are we having class tomorrow? Maybe we'll take a day off tomorrow. What do you say for Canada Day?
Sure, we'll be patriotic.
Well, I don't know how patriotic I feel right now, um, but it's a good sentiment, Brian. Okay, so let me just share. We're gonna finish the laws of Hilchos Gazela today, Hilchos Gazela and Geneva. So that's a mazel tov. We've spent a couple of months on this, on Siman Zion, and we're going to start Siman Ches, God willing, at when we regroup. So for our final halacha in Hilchos Gazela, let me just share with you two Mishnayos that I'd like to learn together with you. Okay? So the first Mishnah that we're going to see is as follows. This is from Bava Metzia. The Mishnah states as follows. I hope you can see it. Hamafkid eitzel chavero behema okelim. That if you, my mistake. Mishnah Gimel. Amar lishnayim gazalti laechad mikem mana. A guy goes over to two people and he says, I know that I've stolen from one of you. I've stolen $100 from one of you, because maybe I took something from your home when I shouldn't have, or I borrowed something and I never returned it. Ve'eni yodeya eza mikem. And I don't remember which one I took the $100 from. I just know that I've stolen something from one of you guys. O aviv shel echad mekem hifkid limana ve'ena yodeya ezehu. Or let's say a guy goes over to two people and he says to them, your father gave me some money for safekeeping or an object for safekeeping, and I have it and I don't remember which of your fathers it was. So the halacha is in both of those cases, no sein lazem mana v'lazem mana, shahoda mipiatzmo. So this is obviously a person who wishes to fulfill his heavenly obligations, because if he wasn't at all concerned, he would have said nothing to either person, right? So the fact that he wants to make amends means because his conscience is bothering him. He doesn't want to have this money that doesn't belong to him. And so in order for him to fulfill that, he's got to give $100 to each person, unless he's able to verify it. He can't just give each one 50 because that would not be justice for the person that he truly owes the money to. And the Bar Tanur commentary essentially says this. He says, "Veheim einam tovim lo klum." He says we're dealing in a circumstance where the other people have not asked him to pay them back anything. They are oblivious to this. He knows that he has their property, but they don't know anything. Elohu balat seisidei shemaim, but rather he's coming to fulfill his heavenly obligation. He wants to stand before God without having other people's money in his pocket. So the way to do that is to give each one what you say that you owe. Aval shnayim shetiva'u v'hoda shegazel le'echad mehem. But by contrast, says the Bar Tanura, if two people come over to him and say, you stole from me, each one says, you stole from me, you owe me money. And he only admits, I know I stole from one of you guys, but I don't know which one, but I definitely did not steal from both of you. So Yishba kol echad mehem shelo gazel v'nosin mana lazeh u'mana lazeh. Then in that situation, each claimant has to take a shavua, has to take an oath that he's telling the truth. And since this guy doesn't really know the facts, he has to pay each one of the full amount. So kanas kanasuhu chachamim mipnei she'avar al lo sigzol. And the Bar Tanur's understanding is that this is a penalty that we place upon this guy who admits to the fact that he stole or didn't do something, he's acted unethically by having something in his possession that's not his. And so they basically said, listen, there's no reason for us to be compassionate to you. If you know you stole, you're going to have to just make good. And the similar scenario would be if two people claim against one person. Each one claims, my father gave you $100. And he responds, the defendant responds, I know that one of your fathers gave me $100. It wasn't both of yours. I just don't know which one. So each one should take a shavua that it was his father. And then he's got to give up, he's got to relinquish 200, 100 to each one. And the reason is the ihu pasha benafshe dahabale lemeidak belizkar mihiniach etzlamana. And again, it's sort of a penalty on him because he should have been careful. If someone leaves you objects that don't belong to you for safekeeping, you should have marked it down. You should have kept a record of whose items are in your possession. Now, of course, when does this really get problematic? When, it's more than two people and you want to fulfill your heavenly obligation. They say a story about the Chafetz Chaim that he was a shopkeeper and he discovered once that the scales were slightly off on the scales that he would measure out dry goods, flour, spices, and things like that. And he discovered that he was weighing stuff, and it was to his benefit that the error was being made, that the scales were off. So instead of it saying 1 kilo, it said, when there was 1 kilo being weighed, it said 1 kilo when perhaps only 950 grams were being weighed. So he felt terrible about it. So what did he do? So he's got probably a couple of hundred customers, right, in the shtetl in Radin. So how do you make good? So what he did was that from the time that he discovered his error, he took a little bag, a 50-gram bag, and filled it with whatever goods the customer was buying for the next month or so. And for whatever customer who bought a kilo, he would add also a little bag of 50 grams to each customer, just in case he had stolen from them. And so it can become very sticky if you're providing goods to people and you make an error. Even if you steal from them accidentally, you still want to make sure that you fulfill your heavenly obligation. Okay, now, of course, can you rely on different things? Can you rely on the fact that maybe the customer is moichel, or you put up a sign, or there's always a way to figure out how to mitigate it, but this is a person who doesn't want to have any ill-gotten gains in his possession whatsoever. Okay, and the second Mishnah we're going to see is the following. Ha'omer lechaveru gizalticha. If a person says to his friend, I know that I've stolen from you something, and he'll vitani, or I know that you lent me money, or I know hivkadeh etzli, and I know that you gave me something to watch for you. Ve'eni yodeya im hechzarti lecha im lo hechzarti lecha. And I don't remember whether I gave it back to you or not. So I know that at some point I had something in my possession that's yours, whether it's cash or goods. And I just can't remember whether I returned it to you. So let's say, this happens with books a lot when people borrow books. Did I ever give you back that book that I borrowed from you? And the guy says, I have no idea. I just moved and I just got rid of a whole bunch of books in my library anyway, so I wouldn't even know. So chayav l'shalem. So if the guy is not forgiving, and like one way of doing it is the guy would say, doesn't matter, it wasn't an important book, I'm moichel, right? But let's say the guy says, well, if you did borrow my book, you never gave it back, I expect you to make good on it. So chayav l'shalem. So then he's obligated to pay. Avalim omar lo eini yodeya im gizalticha im hilvisani im ifkadeh etzli patr milashal. But if he says, did I ever borrow a book from you? And he doesn't know and the other guy doesn't know. Neither of them know if there was ever anything that was given to him, right? It's the first case is where I know for sure that I borrowed something or that I took something from him. Here, neither party knows. So then you have no obligation at all. Okay, so taking those two Mishnayos together, we're now going to see the halacha in the Imrei Yaakov. So let me just share that screen with you. Okay.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Rabbi, does the concept of Hamotzi Mechver Al Raya come into play here?
It does. It does, and that's why we're not talking about suing a person in court. You wouldn't be able to successfully sue a person unless both parties admit that there's a debt that is owed. Right here, but here's a guy who wants to fulfill his heavenly obligation. Right.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Got it.
Because he's the one who's come forward and has volunteered the information. So, okay. So, Misha Niskar Shaganav Me'echad Mishnayim, the Eini Yodea Me'eze Mehem. So, if a fellow realizes, you know what, I've taken something from someone's home, I've either illicitly stolen from them, and we'll see there are other permutations as well. The Eini Yodea Me'eze Mehem. And he doesn't know which guy he stole from. I either stole from that guy or from that guy. And he wants to fulfill his heavenly obligation because he's got a conscience. So Yishalem lazeh v'lazeh. So he should give the full amount to each party. Avol im lava me'echad mishnayim. But if he borrowed money from one of two people, ve'ene yodea me'eze mehem, and he doesn't know which one he borrowed from, and neither one of them is aware, like neither one of them says, oh yeah, you for sure borrowed from me. So, meniach lifnehem umistalek. Then one option that you have is you can take the $100 that you remember you borrowed from one of them and say, here guys, I come over here. I'm putting down $100 and I don't know which one of you I borrowed from. I'm putting it down here. Whichever one is the rightful owner, please take. And they don't remember either. But it's fine if you basically say, I'm putting down the $100 and then you can walk away. Because neither of them know. Now that's so therefore in that case we didn't see in the Mishnah. So in the first case, you want to fulfill your heavenly obligation, and you don't know which one of them you stole from, and you want to fulfill your heavenly obligation, so you should give to both people the full amount. But if you borrowed, and here's where we're saying it's different. If you borrowed from one of two people and you don't remember, and they don't remember either, so then you can put just $100 down between the two of them and pull and just walk away. But we'll see in the Imrei Yaakov why there's a difference between the two. But if you borrowed or stole from one of them and you don't remember which one, and you don't know if you've ever made good, if you've ever returned what you stole, or if you've returned what you've borrowed. Then you should go and pay back. We'll see what the language means. But if you're not sure whether you owe someone anything, because you're not sure, did I steal, did I not steal, did I borrow, did I not borrow, then you don't even have to do anything. That's what we saw in the Mishnah in Bava Kama. It's only when you know for sure, and you're just not sure whether you've paid back. But if you are sure that you borrowed or stole, and you're not sure whether you paid back, you should pay back to each one of them. But if you don't know if you ever even stole in the first place, or if you ever borrowed in the first place, then you have no obligation unless the person says, yes, you did. Vim halo tova'o bari shalav mimenu chayv latzis yidei shamayim. But if you tell a guy, I know I think I might have borrowed money from you. Did I ever borrow money from you? And if the guy says, yes, you definitely did, so then if you want to fulfill your heavenly obligation, you have to pay him the full amount. And the same thing is true in all of these similar circumstances. So we're dealing with a person who wishes to say, I want to be pure in God's eyes. It's not a question of fulfilling my halachic obligation because the guy is volunteering the information. Halachically, you have no halachic obligation in a court of law unless someone makes a claim against you. No one has made a claim against you. You're coming forward and saying, I know or I think that I owe someone money. And therefore, this whole sif is dealing with what should you do in order to clear your conscience. So when can you get away with only paying back 100? And when must you pay each party the full amount? This guy 100 and this guy 100. So let's see the difference. So he says, Ve'ena yodea me'ez mehem. So Imrei Yaakov says, you don't know which one of them you stole from. V'gam heim ein tovim o solomar kol echad bevados anihu hanigzol shegazalta miyadi. And neither, Levi goes over to Reuven and Shimon, and he says, I know that I stole from one of you. They're not claiming, yes, neither Reuven or Shimon are saying, yes, you stole from us. Okay, the imshneim tonim bevari, because in a case where Levi goes over to Reuven and Shimon and says, I know I stole from one of you and I don't know from which one it is. If both Reuven and Shimon were then to say, it was me that you stole from, each one is claiming, I know you stole from me. Then in that situation, both of them should take a shavua, that they are the aggrieved party, and then he would have to pay each party. And that could be even halachically, in a beis din. Because once each one now says, yes, you stole from me, then they would take a shavua, which is, it's not clear whether we do this today because we generally don't take shavuas. And if a person wishes to fulfill his heavenly duty, he says, from a human standpoint, a person who knows that he stole and doesn't know which one he stole from, and neither of them are making a claim against him, then to fulfill his mortal obligation, all you'd have to do in a case where they say, he says, they're not making a claim. So if you wanted to fulfill your mortal obligation, if the law, if a court of law you would come to a court of law and you would say, I know I stole from one of them, the court would tell you, give us the $100, and the litigants, the people that you claim that you may have stolen from, that you don't remember which one you stole from, will leave the money in front of them. Because they're not making a claim. They may not even be aware that someone stole anything from them. The gam achshav einam yodim bebari, and they still don't know for sure. So if you went to a court and said, I want to fulfill my legal obligations because I've stolen from someone, they would say, give us the $100 and we'll leave it in escrow, or we'll put it in front of the two of them and let them decide what to do with it. And that's why there seems to be a distinction when you know that you borrowed from one of two people. I either borrowed $100 from Reuven or I borrowed $100 from Shimon, and I don't remember which one it is. So meiniach lifneihem umistalek, and you can just put it between the two of them. And what is the difference between theft and borrowing money? He says, he says the argument goes like this. When I borrowed $100 and I didn't write down in my notepad which one I borrowed the money from, lo nechshav lo lipshia. He says that's not considered to be such an egregious thing. In other words, it's not like I did an act of theft and I'm a bad guy. I committed a crime. I borrowed money and I just forgot which person I borrowed from and I didn't write it down. And the reason why that's not so terrible is mishum delo asik adaite sheyishkach es hamalva v'yalal daito malva acher. He says because he'd never thought that he would forget the name of the lender and that he might, because sometimes people borrow money from multiple people, and then so he thought, well, I'll be able to keep track because, he borrowed it, one after the other. So he went to a group of guys in the shul and he says, I have this great investment, or I need to borrow some money because I'm a little short this month. And he has a bunch of his friends who give him some money to borrow. And he remembers, okay, I borrowed 100 from you, 100 from you, 100 from you. And he pays back each one of them. And then he realizes, oh my gosh, I borrowed from 5 people and I only paid back 4 guys. I don't remember which one I didn't pay back. And no one's coming after him for the money because it's not a significant amount and they're all friends. So he's not to be held so blameworthy for not remembering which one he didn't pay back. And therefore he's patur even from a heavenly standpoint because he didn't commit a crime, and what he's doing is not what he did by forgetting is not so egregious. And by the way, you can also argue that there's some responsibility to be held in the hands of the lender. The lender should have also written down when he lent the money and if the money was returned to him or not. But we have to remember that this is only when no one is making a claim against him, and he's the one who's coming forward. He volunteers the information. But when, let's say Reuven and Shimon come over to him and say, "Hey, Levi, I never got that $100 that I lent you last week," and both of them say that, and he knows that he returned to one of them $100, but he just doesn't remember which one. And he says, I know I borrowed, but I only borrowed from one of you. I didn't borrow from both of you. So in that situation, so there the Shulchan Aruch says you have to give back 100 to each one. Because since you don't remember, since Levi doesn't remember which one he borrowed from, and each one is saying it was me that you borrowed from, so then you have to fulfill that obligation because you know that you've got money in your pocket that is not rightfully yours. So therefore you're going to have to pay to each one 100 when both of them make a claim. But if no one's making a claim and you don't remember, so it's not so egregious what you did, and that's why you can just take $100 and put it in between the two of them and say, you guys decide, maybe you should split it, or if one of you wants to jar your memory. Okay. And then the Eino Yodea im Hechzerlo, if you borrowed or stole from one of them, and you don't know if you've returned it or not, he says, and you want to fulfill your heavenly obligation, so then you should give it back. Yesh omrim dezem mayri afim shekenegdo toin acher kach bori li shelo hechzartali mikol makom hol veikar ho da'aso shel zeh hayadei al yedei atzmo l'chein pater midinei adam. He says, when Levi comes ahead and volunteers the information, I know I have $100 that I borrowed from you, but I'm not sure if I gave it back to you. I know I borrowed $100 from you. I'm not sure if I returned it to you. So some say that that you have a heavenly obligation to return it back to him, even if the guy says, I don't know. I don't know whether you stole from me or whether you borrowed from me or not. But if you want to, so then we said that he should, if you don't know whether you owe Reuven $100 or not, but you think that you may, then you should, in order to fulfill your heavenly obligation, you should give him the money. So some say that that's true if after you confront Reuven, you say, I'm not sure if I owe you $100 or not. If Reuven says, I don't know either, so then you fulfill your heavenly obligation by giving him $100. Some say that that's true if you go over to Reuven and say, I think I may owe you $100, but I'm not sure. If at that point Reuven says, yes, you for sure owe me $100, he says, then it's still only Lachain Patra Midine Adam. Levi is still exempt from a legal standpoint, from a halachic standpoint, but is still obligated from a heavenly standpoint. Because Levi volunteered the information, Reuven never went to him and said, give me the money that you owe me. And I only become obligated to pay someone in a court of law when someone makes a claim against me. Aval im gam hasheni hu mesupakim nifra olo, bazeh poter aflot seis yidei shamayim. But what happens if Reuven says, I don't know what you're talking about? Levi comes over and says to Reuven, I think I may owe you $100. And Reuven says, I don't know. So then according to some, if Reuven says, I don't know anything about what you're saying, then Levi can get away even from a heavenly standpoint and not pay him. But he says, Vahatumim cholek al zeh. Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz disagrees. That even if, when you know for sure that you borrowed money from someone, but you're not sure if you paid them back. So in that kind of scenario, you always have to fulfill your heavenly obligation by giving the guy the money, even if he's not sure. And if when you do confront Reuven, he says, you for sure did not pay me, so then there's even a legal obligation to pay him back. And that's the opinion of the Chazon Ish as well. So when you know for sure that you at one time had his money, you're just not sure whether you returned it, and he's not sure either. So then the concluding halacha is that yes, since you know at one time you had something that belonged to him, you must make good on it in order to fulfill your heavenly obligation. But in a situation, which is the last case, which we're going to see today, where you don't even know if you ever stole from him or if you ever borrowed money from him, you just remember that you had a discussion, but you don't remember what ended up happening, and you go over to him and he says, I don't know either. So then, you have no heavenly obligation. But then, if you go over to a guy and you say, I don't know if I ever borrowed money from you, and he says you definitely did and you owe it to me, so then you have to fulfill your heavenly obligation. The Kevin the Chabir Tovo Bibari, because since Reuven is saying, I know that you're not sure, but I'm sure that you borrowed from me. And you Levi don't know for sure that you don't owe him. Therefore, in order to fulfill your heavenly obligation, you should give him the money that he says that you still owe him. But if Reuven says, I'm not sure, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, then as pater aflat sesidei shamayim. So then you're going to be pater even from a heavenly standpoint, because I don't know whether I borrowed money from you. You don't know whether I ever borrowed money from you. Neither of us is sure. So there's not even a heavenly obligation in that kind of scenario. At least one party has to know the facts. So the difference between this case and the previous case is, in the previous case is, I know for sure I borrowed, I just don't know whether I ever gave it back. So then I have a heavenly obligation because I know one thing for sure, at one point I did owe you money, and I just don't know whether I still owe you money. So in that situation, you have to give the money back to fulfill your heavenly obligation. But if you don't even know if I ever at one time owed you money, and you don't know either, so then there's not even a heavenly obligation in that scenario. Okay, I hope that was clear. So just to review, let's just go through the four cases that we saw here. I know for sure that I stole or that I owe someone money. So in a situation where I stole, so like the Bartanura had said, we penalize such a person for having committed a crime. He just doesn't know which one he stole from, so he's got to give each party the amount that he stole. If a person knows for sure that he borrowed money and hasn't paid it back, that's case number 2. And neither party knows for sure, neither Ruvain nor Shimon know anything about it. So since I didn't commit a crime, I just borrowed money and I don't remember which one it is, I can put down $100 between the two of them and say, you guys figure it out. Okay? That's case number 2. Case number 3 is I know I borrowed or stole $100 from one of you, but I'm not sure. I may have given it back. I may not have given it back, and I don't remember. So then I have a heavenly obligation to give that person who I know that I borrowed or stole from, I have to give him back the money, even if it's possible that I already made good on it, but I don't know for sure. And case number 4 is if I'm not sure if I ever even owed this person money or not, and he's not sure either, then there's not even a heavenly obligation for me to do anything about it. Okay, questions, comments? Okay, that concludes Hilchos Gezela and Geneva. Mazel Tov. I hope each one of you will never be in a Ganav situation. We should hopefully use these few weeks that we've been spending on this to help make sure that we try never to have ill-gotten gains in our possession. And we'll continue Mitzvah Shem on Friday. We'll take off tomorrow, and we'll continue on Friday morning. We'll start the laws of Dinei Nizke Mama, which is the laws of damage. When I end up damaging someone else's property or someone else's finances, how I make good on making restitution. Okay, so have a great day, everybody. Happy Canada.